You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people to enjoy, to fight climate change and to help wildlife thrive.
Today I'm off to Sherwood Forest, home famously, of course, of Robin Hood. The name Sherwood Forest actually comes from its status as a shire, and the word shire was turned into Sherwood of Nottinghamshire, therefore Sherwood. Anyway, I've come to visit two trees in particular, the Parliament Oak and the Major Oak. But before we get to that, a lot more details on why those trees are so important later on. But first of all, of course, I have to meet my two guides for the day.
So I'm Louise Hackett. I'm the treescape lead for Sherwood. I manage essentially a partnership project across the landscape of what was the historic Sherwood Forest. So that extends from Nottingham up to Worksop and Retford.
Fantastic. So huge portfolio. And I'm also joined by another Adam. So you are?
Adam Cormack, and I head up the campaigning team at the Woodland Trust.
Fantastic. And we are standing in a beautiful field. I've forgotten to bring my suntan lotion, so I could have a red bald head by the end of today, which is very naughty. But we are standing by, well, I'm going to start with, it's called a palace. That may not be what you quite imagine this to be. I'll try and put this on my social medias and the Woodland Trust social media so you know what this looks like. But who just wants to explain to me a bit about where we are? Oh, Adam's being thrust towards the microphone.
So we're in a field in the middle of Nottinghamshire in a place called Clipston, and we're by King John's Palace, right, which is a few remaining walls from an old royal hunting lodge that's about 900 years old. So this dates back to that time when Sherwood was a royal hunting forest. So it's called King John's Palace, but you have to kind of remove that idea of a palace from your mind.
Yeah.
As you're saying, Adam, it's basically a few remaining walls, which I can still find it interesting.
Yeah,
kind of imagine what life was like here.
No, it is. I mean,
ago.
yes. I mean, look, it is a few remaining walls, but it is beautiful. It's it's not like a breeze block or anything like that. Okay, so we've talked about history already a couple of times, and the only thing I know about Sherwood Forest, and I think I'll be joined by lots of people here, is Robin Hood. So Robin Hood was here. Apart from Robin Hood, what else is the historical context of this place? Go on then, Lou.
So, yes, as Adam was just saying, with the area subject to forest law, which is what made this area a royal hunting forest, the vert and the venison was protected for virtue of the king, and that resulted in an incredible landscape that was a rich mosaic of oak birch woodland, lowland heathland, acid grassland, and it covered a huge swathe, and it was incredibly dynamic landscape, right, with a long history as a hunting forest that would have looked very different through, right, the years.
So it was protected because the king wanted to ride around and catch wild boar and all of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
And what sort of period are we talking about?
So we're talking from roughly the 1100s onwards, or earlier than that even. It has a long history.
Now, also on the car journey here, you were very kindly picked me up from the station, quite away from the station. But I was surprised you also said, "Oh, look, we've been in the forest all this time." So I often think of, we get to a forest and there's a bit of woodland, but we've been driving half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and throughout that time, we've been in Sherwood Forest.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that I think when people say the word forest, people think of wall-to-wall trees. Mm-hmm. But as we were just saying, actually what a forest refers to is an area subject to forest law. And these would have been complex mosaics of lots of different habitats, right, primarily open habitat. That's what would have made it such an enjoyable environment for the king, right, to ride through. Yeah,
because you can't ride through the actual trees too much.
Absolutely,
right?
No.
Okay. And a couple of times you've already mentioned a new phrase to me. Woodland law?
Forest
law. Mm. Never heard of that. What is forest law?
So this was essentially the separate law system that applied to hunting forests, and there were numerous hunting forests across England. So this was a separate law system, as I say, that protected the vert and the venison. So anything green and growing, and the animals, primarily those that you'd hunt.
Right. Protected it for the king.
For the king.
Okay, but it has
and his friends.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's really part of the aristocracy and all, quite problematic in lots of social ways. But actually, it has an environmental benefit because it was saved for the king. It happens to be saved for everyone else and nature itself.
Absolutely. So there would have been small communities that lived in these areas, but they would have had very strict rules as to what access they had to certain areas of the land and what they had access to. But all of that defined really what this looked like as a natural landscape, and it really protected quite a special wood pasture habitat.
Wonderful. Now, also, Adam, you are clutching a very exciting looking book, proper old big bound book called Sherwood Forest by Joseph Rogers. So how old is this book for a start?
So this book is just over a century old.
Wow. Okay, proper old book. And this is all about Sherwood Forest. So how's it split out, this book? I mean, it's a huge tome. So was it by tree or by person?
It's a hefty tome, isn't it? So it's a kind of miscellany of Sherwood Forest, really. So it covers the important old trees of Sherwood Forest. There's a little chapter on the major oak, which is a tree that we'll see today, chapter on the Parliament oak, and there's a chapter on where we're standing now, King John's Palace. So I thought I might just actually read out the first sentence, because I think it's a good kind of encapsulation. So remember, this was written sort of 100 years ago. So such a feeling of quiet dwells in this little sleepy village, consisting of a few labourers' cottages and farmhouses, with straight canals along the meadows, in place of the pleasant river, with the golden ragwort flourishing on its banks, that, from its appearance, a stranger would gather no idea of its ancient importance. For there is nothing to indicate the rude state which must have at one time here been maintained.
Well, look, it's a nice day. We're standing by this palace. That's not why we've come here, though. So just give me an idea of the trip we're going to take today.
So we're going to go and look at two really important trees for Sherwood Forest now. We're going to go and look at the Parliament oak, which is just 5 minutes up the road from here, and there is links to King John's Palace, so we'll talk about that when we're at the tree. And then we're going to go to the major oak, and I'll let Lou just talk about the major oak.
Okay, that's all to come. Bit of walking involved first, though. So as we walk towards our first big tree of the day, the so-called Parliament oak, I'm going to read from the other Adam's 100-year-old book about this oak. I'm going to be very careful so I don't trip over and ruin this book, which has been looked after for over a century. It has been stated with some probability of truth that King John, while hunting in the forest, was informed by a messenger of a revolt of the Welsh and of an insurrection in the north of England, that he hastily summoned a parliament to meet under this tree, and that it owes its name to that incident. On another account, it connects it with Edward I, who, when on his way to Scotland in 1290, summoned a parliament to meet at Clipston. So it has no idea why it's called Parliament Oak. It could be to do with King John, or it could be to do with Edward I, but it is called the Parliament Oak, and here it is in this beautiful book with a drawing or engraving of it. It looks like a sort of split oak. I'm just trying to see how accurate it is. There it is. Oh, look, I'm being shown. I'm looking at the wrong blooming thing. There we are. So we can see it in the book, and I can see it in real life. And what a wonderful book, and what a wonderful place to read out that paragraph. All right, we're resting. I just feel this is so apt. We're resting our book about the Parliament Oak on the Parliament Oak, and Lou is. I've lost the place. Page 100. If you're following along at home on the few versions of this 100-year-old book that might be out there, it's page 197. I feel like I'm leading a congregation. If you turn that in your prayer books, past the Shambles Oak, there we are, the Parliament Oak. So Lou, did I miss out something important you wanted to read about this?
I just wanted to point out on the illustration, because I think on some of the old illustrations you can see that there's two what we call functional units. So one of the incredible thing ancient oak trees do is they can separate themselves into functional units, which is a fantastic life-saving strategy, which I'll happily talk about more later. But on a lot of the old illustrations you see what essentially are two functional units remaining of the tree.
So just to be explained, a functional unit is what looks like two trees, but you're actually saying this is one tree, which looks like two trees, but you're calling them functional units.
Absolutely. So as it's aged, the tree has essentially segmented itself, and these segments, so what was once one tree starts to split out into multiple segments, which generally is associated with a large limb. But it means that if you lose one of your limbs and it's quite a catastrophic loss, you could lose that functional unit at no risk to your other sections. So it's quite a good life-saving strategy. So in a lot of the old images you see these two sections, and because we've got two trees still standing here today, people think that they are those two fragments, but in fact it's only one remaining. And the way we can identify that is, you can see on the left hand side of this illustration, you can see a small burr forming. That's what I'm resting the book on.
Right, wow.
So it has grown quite considerably, this burr, since
a little
the illustration.
bump 100 years ago. It's now a proper table.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is what's still standing, and the piece of dead wood on the ground next to it.
Okay, let's have a look.
Which is,
Oh, okay. Yes, that was that whole tree.
it was the section that joined those two
Right.
functional units. So it was
And what's happened to that other functional unit then? That's
So
gone.
that's been lost, yes,
So-
absolutely. So what you can't see in this image is essentially it was a huge tree at its kind of height, at its kind of, when it was at its kind of fullest,
Yes.
9.5 meters in circumference. So it was a large tree, and it would have been completely hollow at that point. And that's when basically as the dead wood decayed, just those two functional units remained, and now just one.
Right.
But what's magical with this tree is that you'd never know that to look at it today without these kind of past illustrations and photographs, because what's actually happened is it's precluded fully around this remaining fragment.
Right.
So it looks like a 100-year-old oak, but actually it's potentially 900 years old.
Wow, that's extraordinary, isn't it? So yeah, well, that is extraordinary. I was going to say, how old is it? So we're looking at 900-year-old oak here. Well,
But it's done this magical thing of having gone back to a younger stage of its life.
Yes.
We quite often think of trees of being young, mature, old, and then dying, but actually what they have the capability of, which is what makes ancient trees so special, is they can go back to an earlier life stage. So this is now a mature tree, and there is nothing preventing this tree going through that full lifespan all over again and becoming a huge, hollow ancient in the future. It is already an ancient, but
yeah. Well, that's extraordinary. So really, it might never die because it just rejuvenates, really.
absolutely.
An amazing thing. Well, that is brilliant. Adam is also standing here. And we're talking about history, Adam. And we're talking about the history of this tree. But that feeds into quite an important bit of work you're doing about history in general.
Yes, so the Woodland Trust has been running a campaign called Living Legends for the past couple of years, which is about improving protection for trees like the Parliament oak, but other very old and very special trees. So we're calling them heritage trees. So people have been campaigning for protection of these trees for a very long time, for decades. But the last couple of years is where we've pulled that all together into a campaign called Living Legends. We've got a petition that's been supported by over 85,000 people calling for legal protection for very old and special trees.
So don't they have... I mean, I always thought trees were protected anyway. I mean, you're not just allowed to cut down a tree even in your own garden because the local council checks.
I think what you're talking about there is the sort of day-to-day protection that trees have from our feelings and attitudes towards them, which is the sort of social contract that we have, that you don't just cut down trees. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that protects trees sort of day in, day out. There are policies and a few legal instruments, felling licenses, tree preservation orders, that sort of together provide trees with a basic level of protection. But there's nothing to recognise the value of this tree, the Parliament oak, so 900 years, or maybe even a bit older than that, in the way that we were just at King John's Palace. So we were looking at a kind of heritage asset that was sort of similar sort of age, really, grade listed, has legal protection, it's recognised for its value and for what it can tell us about the past and tell us about ourselves. And what we think should happen is that trees should just have the same level of protection. Not all of them, just the oldest and most special.
So this 900-year-old tree doesn't have any historical protection compared to the 900-year-old odd palace, which does have historical protection. Is that fair?
You just said, Adam. No, it doesn't. But that's the case for all of our really old and special trees. So we've just got a tractor going past.
There we are.
So we're here. I mean, the tree is just, you can probably hear the cars going past. It's on the corner of a road, it's the corner of a farm track, and I think that just shows you that these trees aren't all in really safe, secluded places.
Yeah.
They're there in day-to-day life, on road verges, parks, gardens, sometimes in woodlands, on farms.
It's odd, isn't it? Because it is a part of the British history. Not just natural history, but, you know, a history of parliament, of democracy, of kings and queens. And yet it doesn't have any legal protection that if it was made of bricks, it would have. But because it's actually not made of bricks, it doesn't have.
That's it, really. So I think we protect the things that we've made as human beings. So we protect the buildings, the artworks, the things that we've created. But so these old trees should just have a similar level of protection. It's great that we protect all those other important things, scheduled ancient monuments, battlefields, works of art. Trees just fit into the same category.
And if listeners to our podcast believe in what you're saying and want to support that, how do they do that?
So listeners can go to the Woodland Trust website, or just go to Google and type Living Legends campaign, and they'll go straight to our petition. And they could be the 85,001st person to sign our petition, although hopefully it will have gone up a bit by the time people listen to this.
So Living Legends, that's what you're looking for, the Woodland Trust's Living Legends campaign, and you can add your name to that.
That's right. And I think there's one other thing to add to that, which is that over the last 6 months we've been successful in securing a private members bill for heritage trees. So we're actually on that journey now towards legislative protection for some of these trees. Baroness Young has introduced a private members bill, so this is a heritage trees bill, and it introduces this designation of heritage trees. So it's not law yet, it's got quite a long way to go before it does become law, but you can go online, you can Google that too, and you can read it for yourself. It's only 5 pages long, it's quite short. It just talks about bringing in legal protection for very old and special trees.
Of course, and that needs government support. We've got a new government, so who knows what will happen to that, but I know you'll be hoping that actually gets pushed forward.
Yeah.
Okay, well, whilst everyone is going to that petition to sign their names, we can walk on to another tree you wanted to show me. Where's that?
So we're going to go to the major oak now, which is probably the tree that most people know or think about when they think about Sherwood Forest. You know, it's legendarily the place where Robin Hood lived. You know, you can make that decision for yourself when you get there and you see the tree.
Okay, brilliant. All right, well, we're going to walk on. You go sign a petition if you fancy, or just sip your cup of tea. Now, one thing, I was keen not to do too much about Robin Hood, because I thought there'll be loads more to talk about. In fact, I've hardly mentioned Robin Hood. I feel that's a bit of a miss. So, Sherwood Forest, most famous, the home of Robin Hood. He's a real character, isn't he, for a start?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Right. Robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. I know you're a tree expert, not really a Robin Hood expert, so this is a bit unfair. But from your understanding, is that a good reflection of what happened, or is it more complex than that?
Well, I think you can easily understand how Sherwood Forest would be a landscape someone like Robin Hood would be able to hide.
Yeah.
And for hundreds of years, you would have had to have hired a guide to take you through this landscape. It was considered so dangerous.
Really? You get mugged.
Absolutely.
And it was the king's hunting ground, so this was a good place for someone who wants to, pick on the rich. Would be a place to do it.
It had an entirely different law system, so it prevented us, the commoners, from taking the vert or the venison from this landscape. So you can understand how local people would be slightly annoyed at the fact that the king was holding all of that for himself.
Yes, slightly annoyed. I think that'd be a great description of Robin Hood. He was slightly annoyed, so he set up his band of merry men to take back the venison. Anyway, and it's still today, I mean, that's what draws a lot of the tourists in. We're standing up by this huge oak, but of course around us lots of signage about Robin Hood, and lots of young people dressed in green, running around with lovely hats on. So yeah, still a draw.
Absolutely, and internationally as well, which I think is really exciting. I think for the major oak specifically, it's hosted many guests from across the world, and not many trees can say that.
We've arrived at the major oak, which is a major tree. It is not called the major oak because it is big, is it?
No.
Okay, so let's first of all explain why it's called the major oak.
So it's named after Major Hayman Rook, who famously illustrated a lot of named trees across this landscape and Derbyshire also, but a lot of trees that were incredibly significant in this landscape but have since been lost. The irony is he didn't actually illustrate this tree.
Gosh. So it's called after him, but it's nothing to do with him at all.
Well, he was certainly in this area and will have absolutely have seen this tree. And there is an illustration that quite often gets labelled as the Queen Oak, which was its name before it was known as the Major Oak. But actually, when you study that illustration, it bears no resemblance to this tree.
Okay.
And
so it's like in honour of a man who chronicled the trees of this region.
Absolutely.
Fair enough. Now, let's describe it, because it is an oak. To me, those familiar with the Harry Potter novels might think of it more as the Whomping Willow. It's very sprawling, not particularly high, doesn't really have an obvious crown. It's spreading out and it's supported by lots of metal supports, which probably because the limbs are so old they might fall off or fall down, and it's got a fence around it to stop you going up to it now. Is that a fair description?
Absolutely. So those props, kind of the history of this tree is quite complex. So actually measures were taken since the Victorian era to hold this tree together, essentially. There are some fantastic pictures of the blacksmith posing in front of this tree with all the metalwork that we can actually still see in the crown. You can see all of that metalwork holding the branches together.
Oh, right. I thought, now, because it's all brown, I missed it. I thought that was ropes. That's metalwork.
No, that's all metalwork, and that's been there.
This is really pulled together, this tree. It's being held together. Yeah. But it still limps on.
It does.
Right.
It is struggling.
How old is it?
So that's a fantastic question.
Okay, I can tell from the moment I asked it you didn't want to be asked that question. Okay, what is it not clear how old this tree is?
There's no way to definitively say how old this tree is.
But you're an expert. Give us your best guess.
There are lots of guesses. Some say 800, some say 1,300.
Which would make it very old for an oak, isn't it?
No matter what, it is a very old tree.
Right. And I mean, I rather unkindly described it as limping on. It's clearly having help here. Is nothing particularly wrong with it? It's just old, is it?
No. So it's not its age that is causing it issues. Right. So as I was saying, the Victorians did a lot of work in terms of trying to keep the tree together. It was an incredibly popular tourist attraction. For the Victorians.
Still is. There's a picnic area right by here.
It has 200 years of people visiting this tree.
Right.
And unfortunately, that has compromised the tree.
Why would that? People coming along, standing by the tree. What harm does that do?
So the first thing you want to do when you're visiting an ancient tree is you want to walk right up to it, don't you? And put your hands on it and kind of make that connection. And for a long time, you could do that. At the moment, it's fenced off. It's been fenced off for 30 odd years. And that's because the compaction around this tree is considerable. And
that makes it hard for its roots to actually function.
It means that the roots can't access the water and nutrients needed. Right. And it's now struggling, unfortunately, as a result of that.
Now, also, we're sort of one side of the tree. As we passed it, I could see sort of round, metal thing attached to it. Looked like a scientific instrument. What's that?
Yes. So a lot of work is happening on this site at the moment to hopefully remedy some of the issues that the major oak is happening. So RSPB have employed a whole range of experts from many different fields. And I've been working with them and Myers Co College to fit dendrometers to the tree.
Say that word again?
Dendrometers.
Dendrometers. What's that?
So these measure the growth and shrinkage of the sapwood. So they're fitted to
the sapwood's the internal bit.
Yes. So this is the part that transports all of those water and nutrients.
Right. So it's got a sort of it's got something buried inside the tree which is measuring internal movement.
So it's fixed to the tree, but it actually sits on the bark. So we've used 1 penny coins, which, because they're magnetic.
Literally 1 penny coins.
Yeah, there are multiple penny coins
Right.
glued to the major oak now, and the dendrometer just sits on that It has a magnet, and it just sits on there, and it measures to the micrometer any growth or shrinkage every half hour.
Right, whether it's like it's breathing, whether it's breathing out or whether it's breathing in.
Absolutely.
And why? That's extraordinary. That's a normal process, is it?
Yes.
And that's as the water's coming up, it sort of expands a bit, and because that's how it pushes the water up anyway, isn't it? It's sort of like a snake sort of pushing it up. And
it
down.
will be responding to its environment. So what we're seeing is, after a really dry spell, it shrinks, and after a wet spell, it expands.
Right.
So the cells are always dividing, but the kind of quantity of water in those cells depends on the environment and what's happening.
And what you'd want to see in a healthy tree is a lot of movement or not a lot of movement?
It's not so much about the movement, it's more about the trajectory. So over time you want to see the average going up, that it's constantly growing.
Right.
Obviously the tree is struggling at the moment, and it's a fascinating time to be observing what different sections of the tree are doing. Right. Because as we were talking before about functional units, the major oak will have separate functional units. Right,
so this is what I was going to come on to that. We talked about how actually trees could be immortal in a way, because it's not that an acorn comes off and grows another tree, but they split, so the same tree sort of starts its life again, genetically the same tree. That, you're going to correct me here, but that hasn't happened here, has it?
So in what way do you mean? Sorry.
Well, no, that's all right, because I'm an idiot, aren't I? What I mean is that wouldn't it be lovely if, like we saw with the Parliament oak, that if a bit of it sort of split off, and you went, okay, maybe the first bit might die back, but genetically the same tree, that continuous sort of lineage, just starts afresh next to it. Not as an acorn, but as a part of its own tree. But we don't seem to be seeing that.
It has done that.
In the past, or I just can't see it now?
You just can't see it.
Okay, I told you I'm an idiot. Show me what's going on.
So we were just... So the Parliament oak just makes it incredibly obvious, because we have images of 2 very obvious separate functional units, because the area in between has died away over time. But we can't see that so obviously with the major oak until you really know what you're looking for. Right. So
that's why I've brought you along. Go on, show me what I should be looking for.
So if you see that large limb to the right,
yes,
you can almost see a line going down the bark.
I definitely can see a line. It looks like someone's laid something over that.
Yeah. So basically, what it's done is it's formed this separate functional unit associated with that large limb.
Right.
And what you generally see when you've got strong functional units, in my eyes, you often see this almost like a woundward response to the separate units. They're starting to understand that they're separate and behave, so they're healing against each other. So that tree,
that part of the tree, really reaching out into the picnic area, if you like, is part of a sort of a new development.
Not new.
I was going to say it's all new is relative, because this thing is maybe 1,000 years old.
It's hard for us to understand, but it's essentially, my right arm connected to my right leg is functioning completely separately, and if that was to be completely removed, it would continue happily.
Yeah, fine. So even if the main bit of the tree died back or something terrible happened to it, we might have that maintaining itself as a separate entity.
Potentially. We've definitely got some functional units doing better than others.
Right.
And what that means is perhaps worst case scenario, one of those functional units are going to die.
Right.
Worst case scenario, hopefully that's not going to happen. But if it did, that doesn't compromise the other units.
Right.
So they could carry on and
Yeah. So you're saying, even though it hasn't got a huge amount of leaves on it, it's rather bald. Actually, that baldness is a sign of hope, which is I'm just trying to take a good message for bald men like me. The world over, there is hope in your baldness. Men and trees unite. You're not so sure. I
It's
get
kind
that.
of the opposite, but
Oh, it's the opposite of that.
you
were saying there were hope, though.
there's hope where you've got more leaves.
Oh, there's hope.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find a good
Sorry.
message in me. Well, no, there's never a good. Right, scrub that. It's always bad.
It's not. So I quite often describe ancient trees. The process of retrenchment is they're quite like people. Is they become a bit more rotund.
Right.
They shrink,
Yeah.
and they lose their hair.
Yeah.
And this is what trees do. And that is a really positive process.
She's not describing me, just so you know. This sort of, I mean, it's an amazing bit of nature, this. It's also a bit of history, which neatly ties into this Living Legends campaign, isn't it? It's an important part of British history.
It is. When you think about this tree alone, let's say it's 1,300 years old, which is the upper estimate. The history that this tree has witnessed in its lifetime is immense, in a way that we would certainly look to protect a building that has that history connection to it.
Yeah, I mean, so 1,000 years ago, what are we talking about? What were we saying before? It's like, is that 1066? So I don't know, Edward the Confessor. I don't know, if this was a man-built thing, we'd all be buying tickets to see it, and there'd be an ice cream van outside, and it would be on a tourist trail. This is free, a part of British history, a witness to British history. And yet, trees like this don't have the same sort of legal protection that if it was made of bricks, it would have. So, do you think this is a good ambassador, or how good an ambassador is this for the sort of campaign you're trying to rally around?
Absolutely. I think this is why people love to visit ancient trees. I don't think you can help but be in awe for its age and what it's witnessed in a way that I think is quite hard for us to comprehend in comparing to our own lifespans.
Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Join us next month when Adam will be taking another walk in the company of Woodland Trust staff, partners and volunteers. And don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you're listening to us, and do give us a review and a rating. And why not send us a recording of your favourite woodland walk to be included in a future podcast? Keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes, and please tell us what makes your woodland walk special. Or send us an email with details of your favourite walk and what makes it special to you. Send any audio files to podcast@woodlandtrust.org.uk, and we look forward to hearing from you.